let's get into world building. So, as all the other classes, we got intro and philosophy. That'll be brief, but especially with world building, I'd like to take a look at Unreal Engine 1, 2, and 3, really briefly, but just to understand where are we coming from and what is the real core of the Unreal Engine, especially for world building. Schematic overview again, and the advice section. Intro and philosophy for world building. The Unreal Engine has always been about being a complete tool set that is very visually oriented. The Unreal Engine historically has always been very level-centric workflows and focus. It started as a level editor in the late 90s, pretty much, and it carried on as a level editor more or less. You know, the more and more things started to be coming in as the engine grew, but it had that real level editor focus, and you can still very much so see that. So in 1997, 1998, 1999, you know, Unreal Engine 1, it started like with Unreal 1 on the top left there. You can, you know, and it evolved to Unreal 2, it was called Unreal back then, a few years later, but it was very BSP brush focused, you know. But a lot of the things that are actually in Unreal Engine 4 nowadays, you can still somewhat see them back in the engine from back then, right? The visual focus, the fact that the viewports showed you the lighting and everything as exactly as the game would show it, all of that was already in there. The actors were already in there, the camera controls were in there, the viewports or the different view modes, all of that was already in there back then. When we got to Unreal Engine 2 around 2002, you know, we started adding meshes because there were no 3D meshes before that. Everything was done with BSP and brushes. And we started ending up with a hybrid BSP mesh workflow. Scripting was still very simple, just events and tags, which you can, you know, in the blueprint class, we'll take a very brief look at that as well. But we started adding outer worlds, and so on and so on. And there were subtractive worlds, which was really funny, because so you had, essentially, to make a world in Unreal Engine 1 and 2, you had to carve out a little box from a big box that was already there. So you started out with a big box, and then you had to make it hollow and make a world in there. So to make an outdoor world in Unreal Engine 1 and 2, you had to make a very big box, and then that's the worlds inside a bigger box. It's very weird. There's a lot of other small fun stuff with that. If you did Control S, it would subtract a cube or subtract the shape from it. So a lot of people who were new to the engine would do Control S to save. So it was easy to spot who didn't know the engine because they kept having cubes everywhere around the world. Anyway, but by Unreal Engine 3, we really started getting close to Unreal Engine 4 that we have nowadays. We got visual scripting added with Kismet. A lot of the editors that we have nowadays came in, like the Material Editor, Cascade, Matinee, which is the predecessor of Sequencer, and so on. No more subtractive worlds, no more skyboxes. That basically became Unreal Engine 4 minus all the tools and extra power we have now. Okay, and that's where we are now. Blueprint got it added in. A lot of the tools got added with replaced with second generation tools, and so forth. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So just to give a very brief schematic of the schematic that we're going to soon look at. In essence, this is what you're looking at. You got the editor in the very middle, and then obviously the playable experience on the other side. The editor has many sub-editors and tools that are standard included with the Unreal Engine. That are part of that, and that are all, you know, surrounding the core of the editor. Those in turn create placeable assets, or the placeable assets or content or classes, whatever it is, are created in other programs, brought into the engine, placed here. It generates a level. It might be rebuilt. The rebuilding is a pre-computation or pre-calculation or whatever you want to call it. But, you know, like baking lights, it might go through that process. It might not as well. So depending on if it's entirely dynamic, it continues. There are sub-levels, level streaming, that kind of thing. We're going to take a look at that as well. Depends on if you use it or not. That might be routed through it, or it might go directly to playable experience. So that's kind of the gist of what we're going to look at. So we're going to break this down much more. Okay, and just to reiterate, for us, it's really important that all the tools and the sub-editors are part of the editor and the engine, because everything should be built by the same team. It should be following the same style. It should be following the same logic. That's always been our core philosophy. So everything works seamlessly together. And just to illustrate that with this abstract example, I mean, this is just, you know, theoretical example I made as a graph. So, but it illustrates that the simple act of making an elevator would involve all these different tools like Niagara. is our particle editor. You got a material editor. You got blueprints and actors in general, which in turn, brings it along. The whole blueprint framework. Sequencer is the cinematic one, and so on and so on. So building something in Unreal is definitely using all of the tools together, and they're all entirely interconnected. Okay. There's no text-based scripting. Everything is entirely visual. And we want to make sure it aids experimentation, quality, and diversity. Right.